The residents of Oak Creek Valley called it the ugly duckling of Summit Ridge. For 3 years they threw zoning fines, legal injunctions, and cruel jokes at the concrete and steel eyesore looming over their multi-million-dollar estates. But when the sky turned the color of bruised iron, the laughter abruptly stopped. Cora Higgins was not a woman who cared about curb appeal. At 62, with silver hair cropped short and a face weathered by decades spent on construction sites, she valued function over form. For 30 years, Cora had been a senior geotechnical engineer for the state, specializing in soil stability and water runoff. She had spent her life calculating the breaking points of the earth. So, when she purchased a jagged, rocky 5-acre plot on the steep incline of Summit Ridge, she didn't build a sprawling glass and timber chalet like the rest of the wealthy newcomers in the valley below. She built a fortress. Directly beneath her property lay Whispering Pines Estates, an ultra-exclusive gated community that had sprouted up over the last 4 years. The valley was a picturesque basin of emerald lawns, infinity pools, and houses that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. The residents were a mix of tech millionaires, venture capitalists, and high-profile influencers who had fled the city for mountain tranquility. The undisputed king of Whispering Pines was Ricky Kensington, a hedge fund manager whose 8-bedroom mansion sat at the very bottom of the valley, right on the edge of the babbling Oak Creek. Ricky and his wife, Madeline, curated a life of flawless aesthetic perfection, and Cora's Hillside construction was a violent disruption to their view. While the valley residents built homes with floor-to-ceiling windows and imported Italian marble, Cora was drilling 30-foot steel pylons directly into the mountain's bedrock. Instead of a cedar shingle roof, she installed a sloped, reinforced standing seam metal roof designed to shed debris. Her walls were formed from insulated concrete forms, ICFs, 12 inches thick, laced with heavy rebar. She installed commercial-grade steel storm shutters. To the residents below, it looked like a cross between a penitentiary and a Cold War bunker. The mockery began almost immediately. "It's a monstrosity," Ricky Kensington declared during a neighborhood block party, gesturing upward with a crystal glass of scotch. The monolithic grey structure loomed above them, a stark contrast to the setting sun. "I paid $4 million for a mountain retreat, not to stare at a federal prison. The woman is clearly unhinged, a doomsday prepper." The joke caught on. In the local coffee shop, the barista would snicker when Cora came in for her black drip coffee, whispering to the other patrons about Crazy Cora's compound. Madeline Kensington, who boasted over 2 million followers on her lifestyle blog, posted a photo of the cabin with the caption, "When your neighbor is preparing for the zombie apocalypse, but ruining your sunset aesthetic. #Valley Life, #eyesore." But the mockery quickly evolved into outright hostility. Daniel Fletcher, the aggressive real estate developer who had subdivided the valley and sold the plots to people like Ricky, realized that Cora's property was driving down the value of his remaining unsold lots. Daniel was a man who didn't take no for an answer, accustomed to bullying local contractors and greasing the palms of the town planning committee. One Tuesday morning, as Cora was overseeing the delivery of a massive, off-grid water filtration system, a sleek black SUV pulled up the winding dirt access road. Daniel stepped out, flanked by a man in a crisp suit. "Ms. Higgins," Daniel said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk about this project of yours." "I have permits for everything, Mr. Fletcher," Cora said, not looking up from her clipboard. "Permits can be revoked," the man in the suit, a corporate lawyer, chimed in smoothly. "The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association has filed a formal grievance with the county. Your structure violates the scenic corridor guidelines. Furthermore, your earth-moving activities are causing unapproved aesthetic degradation to the hillside. Cora finally looked up, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Daniel's. Aesthetic degradation? I'm driving piles to the bedrock because this entire hillside is a dormant slip fault. You stripped the lower slopes of old-growth pine to build those glass mansions, Daniel. You removed the only thing holding the topsoil together. Daniel scoffed. We had the best surveyors in the state approve this subdivision. You had the most expensive surveyors, Cora corrected sharply. There's a difference. This valley is a bowl. Oak Creek is a bottleneck. If we get a 100-year weather event, that creek will back up, and the hillside will liquefy. I'm building a home that will survive it. What you've built down there is a graveyard. Daniel's face flushed dark red. You're a paranoid, washed-up old woman. Enjoy your bunker. But I promise you, I will bury you in so much litigation, you'll be forced to sell this land to me for pennies. True to his word, the legal assault began. Over the next 8 months, Cora was slapped with endless injunctions, stop work orders, and mandatory environmental reviews. The town council, heavily influenced by Ricky Kensington's campaign donations, dragged their feet on every inspection. She spent over $40,000 of her retirement savings just defending her right to build on her own land. The stress was immense. Some mornings, Cora would stand on her reinforced deck, looking down at the pristine, ignorant wealth below, and wonder if she should just walk away. The neighbors didn't just sue her, they ostracized her. Delivery trucks were mysteriously turned away at the bottom of the hill by the gated community's security, forcing Cora to haul her own supplies up the steep, 2-mile dirt road in her beat-up truck. Vandals, likely teenagers from the estates below, spray-painted "Paranoid Freak" across her newly poured retaining wall. Yet, every time she looked at the geological surveys on her desk, she tightened her jaw and went back to work. She knew what the Earth was capable of, and she knew the clock was ticking. By the second year, the cabin was finished. It was an uncompromising, brutalist structure, but inside, it was a marvel of engineering. Cora had self-sustaining power through roof-integrated solar tiles, backed by a commercial diesel generator in a reinforced basement. She had a 6-month supply of food and a medical bay. Down in the valley, life went on in blissful, opulent ignorance. Todd and Sophie James, a young power couple who had recently bought the lot adjacent to the Kensingtons, threw a lavish Spring Awakening gala. They hired a string quartet and set up a massive marquee tent right on the banks of Oak Creek. As the classical music drifted up the mountainside, Cora was busy bolting half-inch Lexan shields over her windows. She had been watching the Pacific weather models for 3 weeks. An atmospheric river, a massive airborne current of dense tropical moisture, was forming off the coast. Normally, these systems swept inland, dropped heavy rain, and dissipated. But a high-pressure heat dome was sitting stagnant over the eastern plains, acting like a brick wall. The atmospheric river was going to slam into the mountains, stall out, and dump an unprecedented amount of water directly onto Summit Ridge. Worse, it had been an unusually snowy winter. The mountain peaks were still packed with a massive snowpack. The warm, torrential rain would melt the snow instantly, doubling the volume of water rushing into the valley. It was the exact nightmare scenario Cora had modeled. Despite the hostility, her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. 2 days before the storm was projected to hit, Cora drove down to the Oak Creek Town Hall. The council was holding a public meeting regarding the summer landscaping budget. The room was packed with the residents of Whispering Pines, chatting amiably in designer cashmere and tailored suits. When the floor opened for public comments, Cora marched to the podium. The room instantly fell into a heavy, annoyed silence. "Ms. Higgins," the mayor sighed, rubbing his temples. "We are discussing rhododendrons and municipal sprinkler systems today. If this is about your property line dispute—" "This is about your lives," Cora interrupted, her voice booming through the microphone. She unrolled a large, laminated topographical map over the podium. "In 48 hours, an atmospheric river is going to stall over this county. The National Weather Service is predicting 15 inches of rain in 2 days. Combined with the snowmelt from the peaks, Oak Creek is going to experience a flow rate of roughly 40,000 cubic feet per second." She pointed a calloused finger at the map. "The culverts Mr. Fletcher installed under the access road can only handle 5,000. The water will dam up at the bridge, flood the basin, and undercut the saturated slopes of Summit Ridge. The valley will not just flood, it will experience catastrophic mudslides." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Ricky Kensington stood up from the front row, adjusting his Rolex. "Madam Mayor, do we really have to listen to the town crackpot peddle her doomsday fantasies? Some of us have actual jobs to get back to." "I am a licensed geotechnical engineer," Cora fired back, her composure slipping. "I designed the spillways for the state's largest reservoirs. If you stay in those houses this weekend, you are going to die. You need to evacuate Whispering Pines. Now." Sophie James let out a loud, theatrical laugh. "Evacuate? Because of a little rain? We're hosting a wine tasting on Saturday, Cora. Why don't you go back to your ugly concrete bunker and hug your canned beans?" The room erupted in laughter. Daniel Fletcher stood up, turning to the crowd. "Folks, the properties in Whispering Pines are built to the highest modern standards. We have top-tier drainage. Don't let this disgruntled woman ruin your weekend just because she's bitter about her own miserable living situation." The mayor struck his gavel. "Ms. Higgins, your time is up. Please sit down, or I will have the deputy escort you out." Cora looked at the sea of smug, smiling faces. She saw absolute, unshakable arrogance. They trusted their money. They believed their wealth was a shield against the natural world. Slowly she rolled up her map. "I tried," Cora said softly into the microphone. "God help you all." She walked out of the hall to the sound of sarcastic applause. When Cora returned to her property, she found the final act of neighborly spite. Someone had driven a quad bike up her access road and deliberately smashed the control panel to her motorized front gate, leaving it jammed open. They had also dumped a pile of rotting garbage on her front step. She didn't get angry. She felt a cold, hollow dread. She cleared the trash, manually chained the heavy steel gate shut, and walked inside. She engaged the deadbolts, lowered the exterior steel shutters, and primed the generator. 36 hours later, the sky bruised to a deep, unnatural purple. The air grew heavy, smelling of ozone and wet pine. The birds stopped singing. At exactly 4 p.m. on Friday, the first drop of rain hit Cora's metal roof. It sounded like a bullet. Within 10 minutes it wasn't raining. It was as if the sky had simply opened a trapdoor. A deafening roar swallowed the mountain as sheets of water, thick and heavy as lead, pounded the earth. Cora sat in her reinforced living room, a cup of tea in hand, watching the monitors connected to her exterior security cameras. Through the infrared lenses, she could see the valley below. The lights of Whispering Pines estates were glowing warmly through the deluge. She could see the faint silhouettes of people moving inside Ricky Kensington's massive living room, oblivious to the fact that just 100 yards away, Oak Creek was already turning from a babbling brook into a raging, black torrent. The storm had arrived. By 8 p.m., the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, had upgraded the storm from a severe warning to a catastrophic, once-in-a-century event. The rainfall rate hit 4 inches per hour. Up on Summit Ridge, the wind howled at 70 miles per hour, snapping century-old pines like dry matchsticks. Inside her fortress, Cora sat by the glow of her security monitors, monitoring a direct feed from a United States Geological Survey, USGS, soil saturation sensor she had illegally tapped into months prior. The graph on her screen was a steep, terrifying vertical line. The Earth was drinking until it could hold no more. Down in the valley, the illusion of safety was violently shattered. Ricky and Madeline Kensington were hosting an intimate dinner party for 6, including Daniel Fletcher and the Jameses, when the power grids failed. A series of bright blue arcs lit up the sky down the valley as transformers blew one by one, plunging whispering pines into absolute darkness. The sudden silence in the mansion was immediately swallowed by the deafening, mechanical roar of Oak Creek. "Just a downed line," Ricky announced loudly, trying to project authority as he fumbled for his phone's flashlight. "The backup generators will kick in any second." But the generators didn't kick in. They were located in the subterranean garages of the estates, and the garages were already underwater. "Ricky!" Madeleine screamed from the grand foyer. Ricky ran to the hallway. The custom mahogany front doors were visibly bowing inward. A dark, muddy water was seeping violently beneath the threshold, soaking into the Persian rugs. Before he could even yell a warning, the pressure became too great. The heavy double doors burst off their reinforced hinges with a sound like a bomb detonating. A 3-foot wall of freezing, black water surged into the house, carrying with it boulders, uprooted shrubs, and the shattered remains of the neighborhood's pristine landscaping. Chaos erupted. Sophie James was swept off her feet, screaming as she collided with a marble pillar. Todd grabbed her collar, hauling her onto the sweeping spiral staircase. The water in the living room rose to waist height in less than 30 seconds. "The creek!" Daniel Fletcher yelled, his arrogant demeanor completely evaporating into sheer, primal terror. "The culvert must have clogged. The water is rerouting through the valley floor." He was wrong. The culvert hadn't just clogged. The bridge supporting the only exit out of the valley had been entirely washed away by a battering ram of debris. They were trapped in a bowl, and the bowl was filling up. Suddenly, a sound completely distinct from the rushing water vibrated through the soles of their feet. It was a deep, guttural groan that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. It was a sound Cora Higgins knew intimately, but one these people had never heard. It was the mountain tearing apart. 2 miles above them, the supersaturated topsoil of Summit Ridge finally lost its friction against the bedrock. Hundreds of thousands of tons of mud, rocks, and timber liquefied. "Upstairs! Everyone upstairs!" Ricky commanded, dragging his wife up the soaking steps. They scrambled to the second-floor landing, pressing their faces against the reinforced glass of the master bedroom window. Lightning flashed, illuminating a nightmare. The hillside directly above the adjacent properties was moving. It looked as if the earth itself was boiling. In horrifying slow motion, a massive wave of dark brown sludge slammed into the Jameses' newly built $6 million home. The house didn't just collapse, it exploded. The custom timber beams, the imported slate roof, the grand piano, all of it was instantly pulverized and swallowed into the churning black mass. "My house!" Sophie shrieked, burying her face in Todd's chest. "Oh my God, Todd, our house is gone!" But the slide wasn't stopping. It was widening, expanding its destructive path right toward the Kensington estate. The water level inside Ricky's home was now cresting the second-floor landing. The structural columns of the mansion groaned under the immense, crushing weight of the floodwaters undercutting the foundation. "This house isn't going to hold," Daniel panicked, his eyes wild. The foundation is floating. We have to get out of here." "And go where?" Ricky roared back over the deafening storm. "The bridge is gone. The valley is a lake." Daniel looked out the rear window. Above the tree line, barely visible through the torrential sheets of rain, a single, solitary light shone like a beacon in the abyss. It was the exterior floodlight of Cora's cabin, powered by her off-grid generator. "The bunker," Daniel whispered, pointing a shaking finger upward. "The crazy woman's concrete house. It's built on the bedrock. It's the only high ground." The irony was a bitter pill, but survival instinct easily conquered pride. "We have to climb," Ricky said, his voice trembling. "Out the back terrace. We use the old logging trail. It leads up to her access road." Leaving behind their designer clothes, their art collections, and their entire curated lives, the six of them smashed a second-story window facing the slope. They climbed out onto a low retaining wall that was rapidly crumbling into the floodwaters. The climb was an agonizing descent into hell. The rain was blinding, feeling like icy needles against their skin. The logging trail, steep on a good day, was now a waterfall of thick, viscous mud. Madeleine lost her shoes in the first 20 yards, her bare feet sliced by sharp rocks and broken branches hidden in the sludge. Sophie wept hysterically with every step, hyperventilating, as the terrifying roar of the mudslide echoed just a few hundred yards to their left. Daniel, the man who had ordered the clear-cutting of these very slopes, kept slipping, forced to claw his way up by grasping the deep roots of the few remaining old-growth trees. Every time they looked back, a new horror unfolded. Another flash of lightning revealed the Kensington mansion detaching from its foundation, spinning slowly into the black vortex of Oak Creek before collapsing entirely. Everything they owned was gone. It took them an hour to climb what would normally take 20 minutes. Lungs burning, muscles cramping, they finally crested the ridge and collapsed onto the flat, stable gravel of Cora's access road. Before them stood the eyesore on the hill. The 12-inch concrete walls stood immovable against the gale. The heavy storm shutters were locked tight. The reinforced metal roof shed the biblical rain with ease. It wasn't an ugly duckling anymore. It was a fortress, radiating an aura of absolute, undeniable safety. They scrambled toward the perimeter fence, only to hit a devastating realization. The heavy steel gate was chained shut with a massive commercial padlock. "No, no, no!" Daniel screamed, shaking the unyielding iron bars. Ricky joined him, throwing his weight against the gate. "Open up, please! We're out here!" They had jammed the motorized track 3 days ago to spite her. Because they had broken the automatic opener, Cora had been forced to manually lock it down with heavy chains. Their own petty sabotage was now the very thing keeping them out in the deadly storm. Inside, the perimeter alarms chimed. Cora switched her camera feed from the USGS data to the front gate. Through the static and rain, the infrared camera showed 6 thermal silhouettes clinging to her fence. She zoomed in. It was Ricky, Madeleine, Daniel, and the Jameses. They looked half-drowned, covered in mud, their faces contorted in absolute despair. Cora stared at the screen. She thought about the lawsuits. She thought about the public humiliation in the town hall, the laughter, the spray paint on her walls, the sheer, arrogant cruelty they had inflicted on her for 3 years. A darker part of her mind whispered that they had dug their own graves. They had chosen to ignore the science. They had chosen to trust their money over reality. Then she looked at Sophie James, shivering uncontrollably, clinging to the steel bars as if her life depended on it, because it did. Cora Higgins was an engineer, but she was also human, and she didn't let people die if she could help it. She grabbed a heavy yellow raincoat, a high-powered flashlight, and an industrial battery-powered angle grinder from her workbench. Unbolting the front door, she stepped out into the howling maelstrom. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet, but she braced herself against the concrete wall and pushed forward. As she approached the gate, the beam of her flashlight hit their faces. They flinched, shielding their eyes. "Cora!" Ricky cried out, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of his usual pompous arrogance. "Please! Our houses are gone. The valley is gone. We're sorry. We are so sorry." Cora didn't say a word. She stepped up to the gate, engaged the angle grinder, and pressed it against the heavy steel chain. A shower of brilliant orange sparks illuminated the darkness, fighting against the driving rain. It took an agonizing 60 seconds of grinding before the thick steel link snapped. She pulled the chain free and shoved the heavy gate open. "Get inside!" she roared over the wind. "Now!" They poured through the opening, stumbling blindly toward the reinforced steel door of the cabin. Cora was the last one in. She slammed the heavy door shut, engaged the 4 steel deadbolts, and spun the locking wheel. The immediate silence inside the bunker was deafening. The thick ICF concrete walls absorbed the roar of the storm entirely. It was warm, dry, and brightly lit. The 6 millionaires collapsed onto the polished concrete floor of Cora's entryway, gasping for air, weeping and trembling from hypothermia. They were coated in a thick layer of brown mud, bleeding, and stripped of everything but the ruined clothes on their backs. Cora didn't gloat. She walked calmly to a supply closet, pulled out a stack of foil emergency thermal blankets, and began tossing them to the shivering group. "Bathroom is down the hall. Strip off the wet clothes. There are clean scrubs and towels in the bin. Do it quickly before shock sets in." Madeline Kensington looked up at Cora, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets, her hand shaking violently as she clutched the silver blanket. You saved us. After everything we did to you." "I warned you," Cora said softly, her voice devoid of anger, only carrying a profound sadness. "The earth always wins, Madeline. You can't bribe it and you can't sue it." Suddenly, the floor beneath them shuddered violently. A tremendous crack echoed outside, loud enough to penetrate even the fortified walls. "What was that?" Daniel gasped, his eyes darting to the ceiling. Cora walked over to her monitor bank. "Come look." They slowly gathered around her desk, staring at the screens. The exterior cameras facing down the mountain showed a scene of apocalyptic devastation. The mudslide hadn't stopped at the valley floor. The sheer volume of water had completely hollowed out the lower slope. As they watched, the ground directly beyond Cora's reinforced retaining wall, the very spot where they had been standing 5 minutes ago, simply vanished. The earth sheared away, plunging 200 feet down into the raging black waters of Oak Creek. Daniel Fletcher's shoddy lower retaining walls had acted as a catalyst, pulling the rest of the unstable topsoil down with them. The only thing stopping the mountain from taking Cora's house, and everyone inside it, was the 30-foot steel pylons she had driven directly into the bedrock. They could see the exposed steel pillars holding the front half of the property, suspended over the new abyss, completely unbothered by the lack of soil beneath them. Daniel stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He realized with horrifying clarity that his own engineering shortcuts had destroyed the valley, and Cora's paranoid over-engineering was the only reason he was currently breathing. If she hadn't let them in exactly when she did, they would have fallen into the void. Todd James sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands, openly sobbing. Ricky stood perfectly still, staring at the exposed steel pylons on the monitor, his wealth and status rendered utterly meaningless by the brutal reality of nature. Cora turned away from the monitors and walked into her small utilitarian kitchen. She filled a heavy kettle with water from her filtration tap and set it on the propane stove. "Coffee will be ready in a minute," she said quietly. "It's going to be a long night." When dawn broke, Whispering Pines was a lake of churning brown water and splintered lumber. The multi-million-dollar estates were simply gone. Sitting at Cora's stainless steel table, wrapped in thermal blankets and drinking instant coffee, the survivors looked around the concrete walls they had once despised. They had lost everything to their own arrogance, saved only by the unwavering grace of the woman they had relentlessly tried to destroy.